Well, welcome everyone to the Wild Divine Bliss podcast, where we explore spontaneous spiritual experiences, including Kundalini type phenomenon, through psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, and lived experience. And the podcast really focuses on normalization, integration, and clear thinking. So we can create language and frameworks for experiences that really don't fit neatly into any model. And our first guest today, I'm actually really excited, is Michael Molina. He is the founder of the Emerging Sciences Foundation, and they have done amazing things with research on Kundalini, but I'll let him explain all that. But first of all, it's like, Michael, welcome. Thank you for being a guest on my podcast. And first, I would just love to know, you are the founder of the Emerging Sciences Foundation. And so clearly, this is your passion. And so from what I understand, this all started with an experience you had. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Corrine. It's great to be here talking with you about this topic today. In my life, this has been the most important thing. Aside from maintaining my life and raising kids and a family, but my experience really began when I was a teenager. Really, in my early teens, the spiritual journey that I embarked on really started when I was maybe around 14 or 15. And at that
Wow.
age, it was a difficult time for me. I was a young teenager, but still struggling
Hmm.
in my academics. Even at the time, school just wasn't a thing for me at that age. Instead, I really just focused on reading books on my own and more or less distracting myself with things other than school. And that had an impact obviously on my parents, who were kind of wondering why I wasn't focused in
Yeah.
school. And so that created a real tumultuous inner environment for myself. And the way that I eventually started dealing with that was a little bit later on, around the age of 16 or so. I started looking outside of the Catholic faith in which I was raised,
Oh, wow.
and
Okay.
find if there were maybe other ways of looking at the world. What were these other religions about? Were
Mm.
there other points of view that were different than what I had been raised in, that could maybe help me on my journey, maybe help heal me? And so I began finding books about paranormal phenomenon, everything from psychic experiences
Oh, yeah.
to energy healing to out of body experiences. And that really showed me that there was this whole other world that was available outside of my own personal experience. And so, even again, from a young age, looking at science books and things like that, I had kind of adopted this really curious attitude towards things, really adventurous and kind of wanting to explore. And so I began shortly thereafter taking on a spiritual practice. According to these books,
Yeah.
if you committed yourself to a particular way of life, meditated and did all the things, you could have an experience of something outside of the normal bounds of human perception.
Wow.
And almost immediately, what I found was that, again, at around the age of 16, was that through my breath and through focus, I was able to seemingly change certain sensations in my body. Immediately, sort of this energy like kind of experience
Hmm.
I became aware of it almost immediately. And I realized that I was able to manipulate what felt like energy consciousness
Hmm.
localized in the body in various ways to alter my mood, perception, and really just everything about me. Within a few months, I met with my family during it was a holiday party or something like that, and they immediately noticed a change in me. They said, "You look totally different. What has happened to you?
Wow.
You look so much better." Those sorts of comments, and I said, "I've started meditating." That's really all I told them, and they were like,
Hmm.
"Wow, keep it up. It's like a new you." So I continued the practice because mainly it was really helping and really helping me heal from a lot of the turmoil that I had endured, in years prior as a young adult. And my practice really consisted of sitting down and meditating for long periods of time. At first, maybe 10 to 20 minutes, and then later about 45 minutes to an hour, combined with yoga after. So it was a
Yeah.
good, this 16, 17-year-old kid spending a couple hours before the sun rose every morning
That's
doing these practices.
that's pretty unusual. Yeah.
Very, very unusual,
Very
and I totally
unusual.
admit
Yeah.
that. It's not
That's
something
great though.
yeah, and, I think part of that was also changing my diet, changing the way that I ate, changing the way that I felt about, and related to my body. This
Huge.
was a
Wow.
vehicle for the transformation of consciousness as I had already experienced, and if I fed it the proper foods and nutrients and did the right things, I could really benefit. And so I continued that practice for a few years actually until, I was 20. So you're talking 3, 4 years of really just solid practice. And it wasn't just in the early morning hours that this practice was happening. What I was
Mm.
mainly doing, and I realized this, later on, is that
Yeah.
I had really adopted this attitude where I would walk around during the day, and every person I looked upon, everything that I did, I tried to approach with an attitude of love, of
Wow.
unconditional love.
That's
And so and it's especially if I found myself in a difficult situation, I would really then, and those were always the most challenging, but obviously the most rewarding,
hmm
was to bring love into those situations. And so it was kind of like a walking meditation after my initial practice that went
right.
on for a number of years. And I'll come back to that because I think it's a really
Jeez.
important piece of this. So at the age of 20, I got up one morning to meditate, went out to breakfast with my father, and he, who invited me out, and we sat down, and I was eating and discussing with him, but at the same time I was doing all this, I was also focused on um, meditating on the base of my spine, which I did fairly frequently. The main reason for that is because I had read that there was a
hmm
power center at the base of the spine,
Oh,
the,
interesting.
the
Yes.
first the first chakra, and
Yeah.
it had been
Okay.
associated with Kundalini energy, which I really didn't know anything about it, other than it is a powerful force and it can awaken. And I had said, I really hadn't experienced anything directly like that. So I just kind of said,
hmm
okay, maybe that's something that, other people experience. So I was sitting there meditating, and when I stood up to leave, I had a sudden, very overwhelming sensation of an energy rising from my lower extremity, from my legs through the ground
Yeah.
up into my head. And immediately what happened was that my normal vision was overwhelmed by a super awareness, and I'll talk about
So
what I mean
this
by
is
that.
all right after you're sitting with your dad?
Yes, I was still
Yes, I love that.
I'm standing up,
Wow. Okay.
and these experiences, by the way, this is not unusual. We've
Mhm.
talked to people who have had experiences, everywhere, in a Target,
Oh yeah, I know
every
there's so much. That's why I'm like so excited to like get people to start sharing about all this. But back to you. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I stood up to leave. This awareness shifted in me, and immediately I became aware of this very bright blue energy field permeating my body, about
Ooh.
maybe a couple inches extending outside of the body. And the awareness of it was hyper real. It was as if my normal awareness was sort of dull or dimmed, and the awareness of this energy field I was experiencing in a state of hyper awareness, in a
Mhm.
similar way that someone might feel when they're arising from a sleep state and then coming out of it and now fully awake. This was
Okay.
sort of similar type of sensation. And then in the next moment that sensation shifted, I then saw this yellow, orange, sort of reddish cloud around my head area. And the perception of it was like a fireball, or like fire or flame or
Wow.
something like that around my head. And then in the next moment, the sensation subsided, it shifted down, and my normal vision was restored. And I realized that I had no sense of time during that experience. There really was no explanation for it.
Mhm.
And so I kind of looked around to see if anyone had noticed anything. I wouldn't have even been aware if I had done anything.
Jeez.
I could have jumped up in the air or done something strange. I wouldn't have known. So I looked around and everybody seemed to be going about their business. So I kind of brushed it off and
Mm-hmm.
thought, wow, I have no idea what happened. And I began to walk outside. Between that time, those just few moments, beginning to walk outside the restaurant, a sensation of love began growing in me. And when I say love, I mean
Yeah.
it was as if the whole of creation was pouring on me the most purest love, and that I was a reflection of that, reflecting that love
Mm-hmm.
back into the universe. Um,
Wow.
very, very intense sensation, and it kept growing and growing. With every footstep I took, it would
Yeah.
kind of like it doubled and just became so extreme within a matter of seconds that I actually thought that I might pass out or might like lose consciousness. It was extremely overwhelming. Um, and I realized that it was my elation, my almost my excitement that this was occurring in me. And as that sensation of love grew and grew, it arrived at a point of intensity that became so profound that at a single moment, it was as if this love itself lifted the veil of reality. It was almost just like that,
Wow.
where suddenly now this love sort of opens this door, and behind this door of perception, I saw what I can only describe metaphorically as like a shimmering ocean of intelligence, that every sparkle in that ocean as it appears before you was fully conscious. And it appeared as though a titanic intelligence sort of revealed itself to me. And during that moment, there was a dramatic shift in my personality and my relationship with the universe. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it was as if I had assumed the identity of this intelligence, but at the same time had become like the tiniest atom in the universe. And that tiny
Wow.
point of awareness and this titanic intelligence were one and the same. In other words, it was like the end of all opposites, the end of all questions, the end of
Wow.
all everything in my life. And I kind of stood in amazement there in this state. And I it wasn't as if I was overwhelmed in my behavior. I kept
Mm-hmm.
doing what I was doing. I got in the car with my father. We began
Yeah.
driving. And to give a sense of what this experience was like, I still remember we were driving down the road. There was a gentleman driving next to us in his pickup truck. And I looked over, and looking at him, I thought to myself, here is the Lord of the universe, robed in flesh, completely unaware of his position in the universe as the divine creator,
Wow.
robed in flesh as a human. And if he only knew what grandeur he was and is and where he came from and what all this is. And we just kept driving. When I got home, I saw, looked outside the window and saw my dog chasing a bird. And I realized that this was this intelligence chasing itself, that whenever there is an action that is performed and a recipient
Mm-hmm.
of that action, whether good or bad, this is this intelligence sort of interacting with itself. And it really put me in a different sort of frame of mind. And it was shortly thereafter that
Yeah.
this sensation began subsiding. And
Okay.
this was very alarming to me because I was in this state and I could feel
Yeah.
kind of in the brow area, sort of maybe in the midbrain, this area, I began feeling this like a door or an organ of perception sort of closing.
Hmm.
And as it did, the sensation began to subside away from me.
Oh,
And
wow. For how
I
long
tried
do you
to
think
sort of
that sensation lasted?
it lasted probably around 30 minutes or so,
Okay.
maybe up to 40 minutes. And during that time, it was like all the questions that I ever had in my life about existence, about whether there was a God or creator, or whether there
Yeah.
was life after death, or what is the nature of the soul. Like all of these deep seated fundamental human questions seem to be answered by this experience. And so after that, as this door of perception began closing, I tried to hold on to the sensation. The more I held on,
Mm-hmm.
the faster it slipped away. And then I found myself in normal awareness. And I don't mention this very often to people, but it was that night. almost like a dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
It's like being in such brilliance. I looked at
Mm.
my life before that time and thought to myself, what have I done? All these things that I've done in ignorance of this
Oh, wow.
divine of my divine nature. I've really, in other words, like sinned against myself in a
Wow,
way.
interesting. Yeah.
And that was very difficult to deal with. But
Hmm.
when I woke up the next morning, it was as if I was like renewed, like I was, yeah, reborn in a way. And that really started me on a course of investigation and discovery.
Wow. That's phenomenal. It's like I've had a very similar Kundalini experience where in the moment it was infinite love. Like, and then you all of a sudden see things from the perspective where all the answers are there. And there's literally like, when you say the words, there's no separation. They're just words. But when you're in it, you can see how there is a complete divine order. And there's not a hair out of place in the universe. And that was just so profound. And for me, like, I also was like, just the time was short. The actual experience itself, I think, lasted maybe 30 minutes. And I was driving when that one happened, of all things. And, but like feeling of like love, like like there were like echoes of it for like a month, but still it felt like, oh my God, like consciousness can be so expanded and I'm living because then it shrinks and it's like, okay, I'm back to this normal world when I know that there's something so much more. It's
Yeah.
just, and then you have to remind yourself, oh, okay, yes, there is so much more. I've experienced it. I know it. But still, it's yeah. And I want to hear, so after, how did this shift your world, and how does its echoes play out for you? I'm so curious.
Well, in all honesty, after the experience, being a skeptical person by nature,
Yeah, like me. Yep.
I immediately thought to myself, did I just have a hallucination or a psychotic break?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, then why was my consciousness at the time, why did it seem so profoundly aware? Going back to the difference between sort of a groggy state and full awareness,
Mm-hmm.
why did my perception of this experience exist in a frame of mind where I was hyper aware of what was going on in me and around me? If it was a hallucination, or if it was some sort of psychotic break, wouldn't I be sort of deranged?
Yeah.
Wouldn't my intellect be blunted? Wouldn't I be thinking strange things? And none of that was present during this experience. And so, um, as is my nature, I went to a bookstore maybe a week and a half later and was walking in the bookstore, and it was almost as if I heard like a an invisible voice, you could say. Not
Mm-hmm.
actually hearing a voice, but
Yeah.
like something called out from about ground level, like, "Hey, look down here." And I, almost cartoonishly, and I knelt down and looked, and there was this book that my eyes just kind of fixated on and said, "Kundalini: Empowering Human Evolution."
Oof.
And I said, "Okay, I've heard of this Kundalini thing before. Not sure what
Oh,
this
okay.
book."
So you'd never heard the term before, this
I had heard
experience.
I had heard of the term.
Okay.
It was described as sort of this serpent at the base of the spine
Mm.
that could be awakened, and I really didn't associate my experience with Kundalini. Again, this is
Uh-huh.
a young
Yeah.
adult, really
Very
doesn't know that,
similar experience. I had no idea, but took me till years later. I'm like, oh, that's what you call that. Yeah.
which is great, I think,
Mm-hmm.
for both of us because
Yeah.
it shows that, the maybe unconscious bias, is
Mm-hmm.
maybe less of a factor. At least that's what it showed me that,
Yeah.
once I picked up this book and started reading it, I immediately became aware that, wow, this experience that I have was driven, according to this author, was driven by this incredible mechanism that lies inside each one of us and can be awakened to activity with the proper conduct and way of life and practices and all these things. And the message in it was was very agreeable to me because the author really was, and this was Gopi Krishna's
Oh,
writings,
okay.
by the
Yeah,
way.
I was gonna ask.
It was very agreeable to me because the author really was saying at the core, this needs to be investigated by science. Don't believe what I'm telling you about this.
Mm,
What I'm telling you is if you investigate it, the things that I'm telling you about it, you'll probably verify empirically through scientific means. And as a skeptical person, as a person who loves sort of scientific inquiry, that really made a lot of sense for me. And and one other thing I think that was really influential in my approach was that after I learned more about the experience, I said, wait, this experience is the birthright of every human. Like this is what we're meant to do.
yeah,
We're meant to awaken our consciousness. And that single thought was like a seed that when it began sprouting was like I wanted to do everything in my power to ensure that this experience could be first of all known by humanity because I obviously it wasn't. This is very
mhm,
unknown, at least in our current day and age. And this experience, the value of it should be known by humanity, should be revealed by humanity. And even if it's not everyone's goal right now, I think once we get far enough
yeah,
along our evolution, this is something that perhaps humanity could adopt as a primary goal, as opposed to the primary goal we have today, which is more or less just to survive. And if we can, make a bunch of money and, that
yeah.
live in the dream sort of thing.
Yep,
Um,
exactly, yeah.
so that's kind of where this all started. And,
Yeah,
through
I
one
love
thing or the
that.
other, started the Emergent Sciences Foundation to really continue that work of investigation. So.
Investigation, yeah, and that's how we met is because I had, Kundalini I've had several different Kundalini experiences in my life, and one of them was just it was so intense, and at that point, I still didn't know the word, and a friend of mine said, "Why don't you try Kundalini yoga to help balance the energy?" And then I heard the word Kundalini, and then I started researching who's researching this because I need to know the science behind it. Like you, I want to understand, and that's how I found you and Linda and the Emerging Sciences Foundation. And it's funny, so I thought you guys were in India, and then when I moved to California to find you lived an hour away from me, I was like, oh my god, what are the chances? So
That's great.
like so amazing, and it's I love it so much that, that I guess we call us all nerds. It's like we just love data. We love science, even though we've had these expanded spiritual experiences. And like you've really gone down the rabbit hole with the Emerging Sciences Foundation. And it's like, I'd love for you to share a little bit about the studies and and actually what even prompted you to start the foundation, how that got started, where things are at now. Yeah, I'm sure like people would love to hear about that.
Yeah, and it's this has been my life's work, and I'm really proud of where we've gotten to today, and sort of where we've come from. Really, the whole impetus for forming the Emerging Sciences Foundation was based on the writings of Gopi Krishna, um, and his writings were very. He wrote many books, but his books pretty much all had the same message: was that humanity right now was living in a way of life that was dangerous to some extent.
Mm,
What he said was that in his experience, and he had one of these experiences of higher consciousness, except his it was perhaps much more intense, and it actually stayed with him. He was able to
wow.
sustain that level of consciousness from the moment that he stabilized in it until his death.
Hmm,
And what he was saying was that in his experience, there was a law underlying human life. And this law was not a physical law like electromagnetics or the laws of physics. It was a law of the mind, a law of consciousness.
hmm,
And what this law basically said was that humanity needs to live in a certain mode of conduct, one that is grounded in love and charity and compassion. And if humanity as a whole deviates from a very specific way of life, that all of these things that we see happening in the world today, the crime, the war, the
Yeah.
unrest, the imbalances, all of these things are outcomes of a violation of us living outside of the norms of this law of mind.
Wow.
And that what Kundalini actually represented was this force within us, this evolutionary force that effectively was responsible for the evolution of our brain as we continue down our evolutionary path, that's
Ooh, I like
designed
that.
to be within sort of the, this path that, Jesus mentioned, the path that
Mhm.
Buddha mentioned, the path of conduct mentioned in the Upanishads and in the Vedas and in the Bhagavad Gita, that would lead us to an elevated state of consciousness. And so what he felt was that research on Kundalini, research on the biological and psychological effects of
Hmm.
this mechanism would reveal its very existence to science. And
Yeah.
that through scientific means, we could actually understand it much better. We could adopt ways of life, modes of conduct that would be in tune with this law of mind, law of consciousness, rather than in violation of it. And
Yeah.
the thing that motivated me the most was that he said, the 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 crux, the main thing that the violation of this law has produced in our modern civilization is the existence of nuclear weapons,
Oh,
and that
wow. Okay.
nuclear weapons were a device by nature to set us right back on the path of evolution. And it could happen in one of two ways: either voluntarily, where we awaken each other, where we sort of get the word out, get the message out, have science focus on this, and then course correct, or nature would do it for us
Hmm.
by creating the circumstances, the people that would need to be in power in order to unleash these terrible devices upon the world, and then set us back on the path of evolution. So we would get back on the path
Wow.
no matter what. And my preference has been, since from the beginning,
Yeah.
that we do this voluntarily. And so,
Voluntarily in the nice way. Yeah. Wow,
yeah,
but that makes a lot of sense, and I like how you frame that with, it's a way of being that we're meant to be this way, evolutionary in an evolutionary way. And of course, it's, altruism, compassion. I mean, research studies have shown that actually lights up the brain. It heals us, and then, of course, when we have societies based on that or small communities based on that, that's when things really thrive. I mean, I think we're seeing even some of that philosophy moving into even businesses or team culture is becoming important. It becomes a more compassionate culture. So we're seeing it in some places. In some places, we're seeing a lot of imbalance, so it's like, oh, teeter tottering back and forth. But anyway, I'd love for you to talk about the studies that the Emerging Science Foundation has now gathered some information on and what you might have found.
yeah. Well, it really goes back to taking a look at spiritual experience in general. So one of the hypotheses behind this Kundalini theory, that we're calling, is that all of spiritual experience, all paranormal phenomenon,
Hmm.
are the result of the evolution of the brain. In other words, the brain is
Yeah.
becoming in tune with more subtle planes of existence. And the challenge is that if you look at paranormal or spiritual phenomenon, the range of experiences that people report are so broad and so unique to the individual that on the surface, it might appear that maybe it's random. Maybe, I might experience things this way, but you might experience things that way. And certainly there's, I think, a personal aspect to spiritual experience that's
Yeah,
unique to
very
each
much
person.
so. Yeah.
Well, the question that we had going into the research was, is there something underlying all of these experiences? Are they all sort of moving? Is it like a fleet of ships that's sort of moving slowly in one direction? And can we find out if there's a commonality in the direction that they're moving, even though they might all seem sort of random? And that's really the first question going in. So we created a survey with hundreds of different questions about different types of spiritual experiences, everything from mystical experiences, unity types of experiences, out of body experiences, near death, you name it. We try to include sort of the broadest range of experiences, just to
Hmm.
share as much data as possible. And what we found very, very early on in our analysis was that, um, in data processing, data analytics, or science in general, there's this concept of signal and noise. So you gather all of this data, you gather all of this information. Is there some signal within this data? And there's various ways of sort of signal detection. And I'm speaking sort of metaphorically here, but it's all basically
Yeah.
the same techniques. And what we found right away was that yes, there is a signal in all of these experiences. People are trending towards this experience of what we now call unity consciousness, which is an experience of oneness with the universe, experience of oneness within yourself, but also the awareness of an intelligence behind the universe.
Yeah. That's a big
And
one. Hmm.
and again, this is just one facet of the experience, but it appears to be the most important. So
Yeah.
that was what we started looking at. And then we also, when we started researching this and creating this survey of and beginning to collect data from hundreds of people around the world, is that we looked at this phenomenon and said, well, we have a description from people historically who have provided very precise descriptions of what this experience is like, this experience of enlightenment, higher consciousness, whatever you might call it, Kundalini awakening. And we decided to say, decided to ask the question, is this experience measurable? Is this something that we can
Oh,
identify and say, can we measure what a Kundalini awakening or an experience of unity consciousness or higher consciousness, can we measure this experience? And we found that we were able to not only measure it, but measure it with very high accuracy, and consistently across all different types of individuals around the world. But we were also able to identify very important facets of the experience, unity consciousness being one of them. But another two that people experience very frequently are energy sensations in the body
hmm.
and
Yeah.
luminosity or sensations, experiences of light, whether it be inside of them or outside of
Oh,
them.
interesting.
So we found that these sort of somatic energy sensations and luminosity sensations absolutely were part of this core of experience that is used to measure this higher consciousness type of
Yeah, I'm
experience.
really curious. What about psychic phenomenon? Does that expand for people who've had a Kundalini experience, or does it maybe occur more, let's say, while they're in it?
That's a really, really interesting question. What we found in general was that psychic experience absolutely does occur within the framework of spiritual experience, and even is very much associated with higher consciousness
Hmm.
experiences. Um, what we found interesting was that it wasn't a good way of measuring whether or not someone had a higher consciousness experience, if that
Oh,
makes
fascinating. Okay, that's
sense.
really that's an important point, I think.
It really is, and it
Yeah.
means if you encounter someone and they're exhibiting psychic phenomenon, doesn't necessarily translate into this person is highly evolved spiritually.
Hmm.
Um, it could mean that this particular way of their mind functioning is quite advanced, but they may not have had an experience of higher consciousness, and that's really important.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow. That's a really interesting piece because, it's like you meet all kinds of people. You can walk on the pier, one of the piers, and you get a psychic who's really, really good. But at the same time, they're like just trying to shake it down for more money? So,
exactly, exactly. But I
yeah.
will say that if you do have an experience of higher consciousness, and this stems from the research, but also just numerous conversations that I've had with others, is that these experiences tend to unlock psychic potential quite a bit. So after the initial awakening, a lot of people report a huge increase in psychic experiences, whether it's being able to understand what someone else is thinking, whether it's being able to predict events that might happen in the future. All of these things sort of open up, if you will, after one of these experiences of higher consciousness.
Yeah. Well, interesting. And so it's like there's some traditions, they call them cities, so it's like, it seems like some of them do become like unlocked from
Yeah.
this.
And that's a
Yeah.
really good reference. And I think if you go back to a lot of the teachers of antiquity, they always sort of said, "Hey, don't seek after the cities; they come. But what you really want to seek after is this liberation thing, this
Yeah.
this higher state of awareness that will liberate you in that sense, and not to worry about getting too materialistic or taking advantage
Hmm.
of your abilities, uh, or taking advantage of others with your abilities."
I like that a lot. So how many people were you able to poll with this? You're saying worldwide. I mean, you found people worldwide who had Kundalini experiences. How many so far have you found?
So we've, in our most recent paper, we have a sample size of over 630
Wow.
individuals from, I think, 30 or 40 different countries.
Wow. And that's over 600 people who are willing to fill out that. I filled it out as well. It's like that questionnaire. It was long, but you also learned a lot about yourself when you were doing it.
That comment is probably the most frequent comment that we received, is that
Oh,
we really tried. I think it's because we really tried to cross the gamut of all of the different experiences someone might have. And oftentimes someone would take the survey and said, I did experience that, but I just
yeah.
didn't, it registered, but I didn't really commit it to memory. It didn't seem important to me at the time. But now that I'm taking the survey, absolutely, this thing was a part of my experience. And they would let us know in
Hmm.
the comments, and afterward, just kind of contacting us and saying, thank you for putting out this survey.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty phenomenal. I mean, and that says a lot. I mean, you probably how many more people are out there but didn't want to fill out the survey? So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a phenomenal amount of people that you're able to study.
Yeah.
And so and not only have you been able to get all the data, you're also putting this into a paper, which I believe is on it's on a preprint right now. Is that right?
Yes, we have our preprint available. It's if you look up higher consciousness or higher consciousness 18, the paper's likely going to change title, but you can also find a link to it on the
Okay.
Emerging Sciences Foundation website. And I think the value of the paper, really, there's a few different pieces that I think are incredibly important for people. Number one is that this experience of higher consciousness, this this awareness of the unity and the intelligence behind creation, this is something that is, according to our research, sort of the underlying thing behind spiritual experiences.
Wow,
Uh,
so it's the intelligence behind. It's like really being able to sense that.
yes. Another way
Wow.
of looking at it is what we call the non locality of consciousness. So, whether you're
Mhm.
looking at a near death experience or a
Yeah,
psychic experience or a higher consciousness experience, what they all point to, and I don't think there's been a lot of discussion or thought about this, is that they all sort of point to consciousness as being a non local phenomenon. And
exactly. Yeah.
this is something where I think science is trending in this direction of information or intelligence, if you will, being primary to the universe. This is happening in physics right now.
Yes.
It's happening with our research, and it's a very important realization. And I think that the convergence between those, where we're on it now. I mean, it's
Yeah, 100%. Like that, you're right. There's a paper in physics that talks about that as well. I think it's even in Nature magazine. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm definitely going to put it in the show notes, that one, because it's pretty phenomenal talking about, consciousness as being something that's innate in matter. I mean,
yes,
that's pretty phenomenal. And then when you can, I say, like, break out of the paradigm of our day to day, let's call it three-dimensional reality. It's like you out of just our conditioned nature of how we see the world through all the conditioned lenses. When you break out of that with these Kundalini experiences, and it's when you start to see, it's like that's really breaking out of the matrix. You have
yes,
those moments of like you're breaking out of it, but then of course to function and live, here we come back in. But then again, you get people like Gopi Krishna who are still able to function and go back and forth, which is, I mean, pretty phenomenal.
And I think,
Yeah.
it's a difference between Eastern and sort of Western mystics, through time.
Yeah.
If you look at someone like Walt Whitman, who was a very earthly, worldly sort of human, and you compare that to maybe an Eastern guru who sort of goes, into this state where they're not aware of anything around them.
Mhm.
And I think the domain of future mystics or future individuals in this higher consciousness state really is one who walks in both worlds, who can function
Yes.
very
Yeah.
well in this world, who sort of draws down these higher truths to donate to the evolution of the human race, which is really, really important. Um, you know, it- these experiences, kind of going back to this experience that we're measuring, the I think another important point to mention is that, again, although it seems like these experiences are very, very diverse, they actually do share this very, very important common thread that can be measured by science. And that, I think, is one of the primary values of the
Yeah.
paper, is to say that you're not alone. If you've
Exactly.
had one of these experiences, if you were to take this very specific list of 18 questions, you are very likely to find that you share commonalities in this experience, and that you exist along the spectrum at some level.
Mhm.
And I think that's really important for people to understand, is that we now have a scientific way of measuring and validating these
Oh,
experiences
yeah.
to show you that you're not alone. You're probably not crazy.
Yes.
And that's really important from not only a recognition standpoint, but also from an integration standpoint.
Mhm.
How do you relate to these experiences? Is it that I'm just sort of this freak of nature who had this weird experience, and now I'm sort of maybe mentally ill? I don't know. To someone who says, I am part of this evolutionary process of the human race, and this experience is a gift. And although it may have been disruptive because it forced me to change my worldview and maybe even,
Yeah.
my diet and who knows what else, um, it's a really important thing to have experienced. And I should work to integrate this and maybe share it with others who might share this type of experience. And there's many groups out there, more and more every day,
More.
who are sharing these experiences, bringing people together to understand that, yes, this is something that's happening to a lot of us. So,
Yeah, exactly. It's like, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast is to help the people who may not want to necessarily speak up about this, or the ones who wonder, like, am I crazy? I know I certainly used to wonder, like, am I crazy? Like, what's really going on here? And to just know that there are many different ways to experience this as well. Because I find sometimes people put themselves in a box and they say, well, I didn't experience, like, I came across somebody recently, they had the infinite expanded state of love. And they're like, well, I didn't feel it from the base of my spine, therefore it wasn't valid. And it's like, well, no, it doesn't have to come from there. It's so there's some frameworks that limit people to like leaning into their spiritual, let's say their gifts or their path, or like to further grow into that expanded state of awareness. And then you get the people who've had that who are like, I don't know what that was. I just got some kind of weird mission that I feel like I'm supposed to do in my life, but I don't want to talk about it. You know,
and I
and
think, I
so
mean, yeah, and I think it really goes back to the framework that we're operating from
yeah.
now after having written this paper. And the framework really is very simple. What it says is that there is this underlying biological mechanism within us that is responsible for all of these paranormal experiences.
Mm,
That biological mechanism we have termed Kundalini. It's been termed Kundalini from time immemorial, and it's our operational name, our operating name for this underlying mechanism, which we don't experience, we don't understand, and we may not experience directly, but is working within us. And we were able to make certain measurements within the context of the paper that showed that, yeah, these all these experiences, they are they are symptoms, or they are indications of a single underlying mechanism at work. So we're
that's
calling that mechanism Kundalini,
yeah.
and that's giving rise to these experiences, and that the experiences are not just neck up. That
Mhm.
people are experiencing shifts as part of this evolution to the systems of the body, the reproductive system, the digestive system, the definitely the central nervous system, that
Wow.
the entire body becomes involved in this process of spiritual transformation. That was clear
Uh-huh.
from our research that this isn't just your imagination. Something in the body is fundamentally changing the way that it does things, possibly to facilitate the evolution of this consciousness or facilitate the new consciousness that someone might possess after the
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
Wow. So I'm wondering, was there anything surprising that you found in the data, first of all?
Yeah, I mean, everything that I mentioned, to me was very, very surprising because the way that we went about writing this paper was this, is we said, let's find the most rigorous hypothesis testing tools. In other words, let's try to prove ourselves wrong.
Oh,
Let's
very
not just
smart. Yeah.
come up with this model, that could work or could not work. Let's actually try to create something that we can try to break down and see if it holds up. So it's like building a structure, like an architectural structure, and now you're trying to hit it with everything you've got to disprove it.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, what we found was that no, this structure is absolutely something that can be found in nature. The
Wow.
structure of these experiences, the what we call the psychometric properties of this experience are very, very strong. And what that means is that this experience is something that happens in a similar way across people, no matter your sex, your age, your country, your disposition. It
Wow.
very likely happens in the same way. That was very surprising to me. The other thing that was quite surprising was that when we began looking at what are the psychological correlates to this experience, in other words, what is the mindset of someone
Mm-hmm.
who has one of these experiences look like? What we found was that there was a huge correlation to this thing that we called selflessness. And this thing actually has a structure. It has a mathematical structure to it.
Wow.
Both the experience that we're measuring, this higher consciousness experience, but also this selflessness psychological construct has its own um, mathematical and psychometric properties, which are quite interesting. And I think this is something new that I haven't seen before
Yeah.
being measured or even identified in science, but this selflessness construct really had two facets, two components to it. One was this idea of oneness. And again, oneness also can be measured statistically, mathematically.
That's incredible that that can be measured. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And, this oneness is really your belief that you are one with
Mm-hmm.
the planet, with others, with the people in your life, with people, maybe strangers that you haven't met, that there is this fundamental connection that exists between human beings that you are a part of, that you can contribute positively to. The other component to selflessness is something that we termed altruism. And that really is, am I doing something about this belief of oneness? Am I doing something to benefit the world and those around me? Am I using my energy
Oh,
for the
yeah.
for the benefit of others? And so you can imagine one is sort of the belief aspect of it. The other one is doing it. And if you
Mm-hmm.
have both of those components combined become this selflessness construct. And if you have both of those, the correlation to this experience of higher consciousness was the highest that we saw in the entire research effort. In other words, if you had to identify what set someone apart who had this experience of higher consciousness, it would be selflessness. And this kind of goes back to this law of evolution that Gopi Krishna was talking.
Ah.
In other words, you live according to this way of conduct. You then invite this evolutionary mechanism to work in the proper way, which awakens the consciousness, which evolves the consciousness, which opens doors of perception. And the fact that this was all measured in a psychometric framework, so using statistics and mathematics to measure it, is something that is quite unique. And I think it adds definitely a lens of credibility, at least in terms of the methods used. It's not,
Entirely. I mean,
yeah,
it's like to even think about measuring that, and having a reference point And especially I like the idea, the practicality of it as well as like, well, there's an action item. You can feel all this oneness and connection, but the altruism is what's so important.
Yes,
Yeah, the
absolutely.
actual action of it. Wow, that's fascinating. Um, yeah, that brings even more questions to mind. It's like for people who are artists, let's say, this is a good question. It's a good puzzle. So for people who are artists, they may not necessarily say, I'm creating my art to make the world a better place. They're just doing it because they feel compelled to do it. So, but they're happy when it uplifts other people. So, how would something like that fit in this framework? I'm really curious.
It's funny because creative gifts and talents were something that we immediately saw was correlated to these experiences of higher
Yeah, isn't
consciousness.
that something? Yeah.
So, and you think of all of the mystical artwork around the world, from Tibet to, to India to artwork
Yeah.
in Europe and cathedrals and everywhere around the world, that these experiences really sort of inspire the soul of humanity to create things that no one's really ever seen before. You know, the architecture and the paintings and all of these things are really sort of um, outlets of this evolutionary impulse
I
as
believe that too.
as it
100% on the same
yeah,
page. Yeah.
as it evolves the
Yeah.
brain, then we become vehicles for this creativity. And I think
Yeah.
the benefit to someone who has had an experience of higher consciousness is they can really kind of laser beam in their creativity into a specific direction for the benefit of humanity. And you see that with, again, a lot of the mystical artwork, or even
Yeah.
in mathematics. Ramanujan, who had the Indian goddess of wisdom and higher consciousness effectively come and deliver these mathematical insights that he then gave to the world.
Oh, really? I did not know that. That's phenomenal.
Yeah. So I do believe it's a vehicle, and I think just
Wow.
these experiences help fine tune it and help us really give ourselves purpose when we're creating. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's I love how it all just dovetails together because with creativity and feeling the energy move through you, it's like you get a divine mission and then you create based on that. Like you said, whether it's the Sistine Chapel or whether it's, a mathematical formula that is going to end up helping
yes.
people. Yeah, that's pretty phenomenal. So, how would you say that, like, let's say today, it's many years after your original Kundalini experience, like, how do you feel like that's changed you as a human being from, let's say, if you hadn't had that experience? Well, yeah, I'm just really curious. How do you think that changes your perception to just today, many, many years later?
Well, I can say that as a husband, as a father, as a mountaineer, as a climber, as a professional at work, as a creator, inventor, builder. If I had not had that experience, I would probably still be doing roughly what I do today. But without the incredible thrill and satisfaction of having begun studying this phenomenon, begun unlocking its secrets, which I am just eternally grateful for the opportunity to even investigate these things and to find so many interesting things along the way that are just so enlightening and just so um, amazing to learn about. And that really, I think, for someone who is maybe lost in their life,
Yeah.
maybe isn't so grounded in a specific way of looking at the world, maybe has looks at the world as maybe just dead and it's random and everything like this. And I look at the opportunity that I have to see the world in the way that I do.
Mm,
I am honestly just filled with gratitude to
wow.
be able to work on this, to be able to discuss this with people like you, to be able to work on this with my wife, and for many years, and now revealing finally this labor of love is in the form of this research paper,
Yeah,
which
it's
really is
huge.
just the beginning. We're at such a preliminary phase of this research. across the board. But what's very interesting is that within the past few years, there's really been what I consider an explosion of interest and of publications also in scientific journals about Kundalini,
This,
about
yes.
yeah, and
Yeah,
it's
and I know when I first started looking into this, even academically, probably like 15 years ago, there was barely anything. And
yes,
now we have like several different papers that have come out. And then with yours coming out as well, there's going to be a really wonderful body of knowledge that people can refer to and empower themselves with. To me, that's what it's all about. It's like empowering people on their paths with
yes,
all this.
yeah, and
So,
I think
yeah.
the most important message of this work is that if you are a spiritual experiencer, number one, you're not alone.
Hmm.
Number two, although your experience may be unique, it is certainly something that, in its essence, is shared around the planet, and
Yeah.
that you,
Wow.
as an experiencer, are part of this evolutionary journey of the human race towards states of consciousness that are so amazing, so beautiful that we can't even imagine in our present state. And so it's with that sort of excitement as the explorers of old that sort of set
Yeah.
out to show what the world has in store for us in terms of adventure and beauty, that we kind of embark on this journey together. So
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Wow. It's like so amazing to talk about this. I'm sure I'm going to have you on the podcast again, as there's just so much information here. And, it's like I've loved following the work, was on the board for a little bit. And just it's because once you've had this type of experience, it's like, how important it is.
yes.
And to try to help other people understand what it's about is like where I'm very passionate about that clearly, so
And thank
and
you
helping
for
people
that.
through it. Hmm?
It's certainly, I think, the most important cause right now, and it's the most important thing someone can set out to do, and it's
Wow.
also one of the most difficult. So I
And it really
want
is,
to
yeah.
doing
But
it. Yeah.
that's why I'm like, I've got lots of people to bring on the podcast and share this type of information. So yeah, it's so good. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I'm going to put some of the books and the links that you talked about in the show notes for people. And then they can also check out what you're doing at the Emerging Sciences Foundation.
Thank you, Corinne. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening to the Wild Divine Bliss podcast. If you've had a Kundalini experience or some kind of spontaneous spiritual event that completely changed your world, well, you're not crazy and you're definitely not alone. There are more grounded, intelligent people navigating this than you might think. Inside Wild Divine Bliss, we host open quarterly Zoom gatherings to the wider community. And if you want to go deeper, there are twice monthly member conversations, some courses, and carefully curated research so you can actually understand what's happening through psychology, science, and real lived experience. If that resonates, just head to wilddivinebliss.com and explore, see what fits. Thanks for being here, and I will see you next time.